Prophecy is an important feature of the modern life of faith.
The life of faith is about creating the best world today, tomorrow, next Thursday, and on.
The American Religious Town Hall is now in session.
Welcome, friends, to the American Religious Town Hall meeting, where the discussion of religious, political, and social issues is meant to promote the cause of religious freedom and to help us better understand each other. And now, here's your host and moderator, Pastor Jerry Lutz.
Welcome to the American Religious Town Hall. I'm James Weingartner, sitting in for Pastor Lutz in another COVID edition of the American Religious Town Hall. We're spaced out and with a fewer panelists in order to be a little safer during this COVID exposure time. But we're glad you're here, and we'd like you to be introduced to our panelists. Tom?
Hi, I'm Tom Plumley. I'm a minister in the Christian Church, Disciples of Christ. I serve First Christian Church in Fort Worth, Texas.
My name is Canon John Peterson. I am a priest in the Episcopal Church, and I'm canonically resident in the Diocese of Washington, D.C.
Hi, I'm Carl Trovall. I'm professor of ethics and history at Concordia University in Austin, Texas.
Hi, I'm Rabbi Dan Levin. I serve as senior rabbi at Temple Bethel in Boca Raton, Florida.
We want to thank you all for being here. It is always a privilege to serve with you gentlemen. Any disruption of the ordinary causes people to wonder about the future and the future beyond this world. People are now more concerned than in the past about the world's end. Various ancient and reliable scriptures define a future time of peace and safety. From the writings of the prophet Isaiah we read, "Violence shall no longer be heard in your land, devastation or destruction or on your borders. And you shall call your walls salvation and your gates praise. The sun shall no longer be your light by day, and for bright light the moon shall not give you light, but Yahweh will be your everlasting light and your God and your glory." The Apostle John writes, "And he carried me away in the Spirit to a great and lofty mountain, and he showed me the holy city, Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, that has the glory of God. And the city has no need of the sun or the moon that they shall shine on it, because the glory of God illuminates it, and its lamp is the Lamb. And the nations will walk by its light, and the kings of the earth will bring their glory into it, and its gates will never be shut by day, for there will be no night there." What do these texts mean to you in your traditions? Is this literal or is it figurative? And if it's literal, when is it going to happen? And if it's figurative, how then is it relevant to us? And these are important and so interesting subjects for me. I would love to hear your thoughts, and we're going to begin over here with Carl.
Sure. I made the statement that prophecy is an important part of faith life, and I think it still is in this way that, at least in my training, we were always taught that this idea of predicting the future really isn't the point of prophecy. I mean, yes, it's happened, and obviously even the Christian faith centrally understands the Hebrew Scriptures as prophesying Christ coming in His life. But really the central function of prophecy is forthtelling, and in Revelation there is a forthtelling, meaning it's about a proclamation of comfort, that at least in the I'll just speak to the Revelation passage here, it's full of symbolic and figurative literature. It's apocalyptic literature, style of literature, and its ultimate function was to comfort people who were being really tortured and tyrannized by the Roman government, to give the early Christians comfort and hope that God would be by their side, that God would see them through this dark period, that they would arrive on the other side, and that God would walk all the way with them to the end of time, really. And so it's really is a constant reminder that God is to encourage us and comfort us.
Tom?
Yes, and Carl, I would just simply add, and God wins.
God wins. Thank you.
That it is that note of comfort. The prophets, however, were also people who told the truth about what was going on in their own time.
Yeah.
They served a function of cutting through the mess, cutting through all the haze of contemporary events, and saying, even in light of what appear to be dire circumstances, God is walking with us now. God will continue to be with us until the very end. And whatever end looks like, if it's individual end or somehow end of everything, God is still with us and will be with us then as well. Do we have a future? People pretty regularly calculate, take little bits from this part and that book and this chapter and just little verses here and there and cobble together notions of when the future will no longer be, when things are going to be over. I think the broad biblical witness, however, is that the future is simply, it is. And yes, there is future and God will be with us. But for me in my tradition, we would want to ask, yes, there is going to be time out there, but what was Jesus most concerned about? So we look at what Jesus was most concerned about, and he has very little, he talks very little, at least from what is related in the Gospels. He talked very little about any sort of end of anything. He talked about how we live now. He talked about making the world better today. He talked about being better, being reconciled to God and being reconciled to each other today, about making our communities better, about taking care of the poor, about giving sight to the blind. And he said he came to set free those who were oppressed. And that is all very contemporary language about action that must be taken today, and not sitting around either calculating or being worried about what's going to happen in any future.
Thank you, Tom. Dan?
So in Jewish tradition, there is a sense that we are asked to live in a covenantal partnership with God in forging the utopia that God imagines for us to achieve. So when you look at the archetypal sort of stories that paint that utopian vision, you go through, for example, the creation story. There's one creation that is not identified as good at the beginning, and that's humanity. Humanity is a goodness in progress. It is up to us to fashion that goodness. And if you look at the story in Exodus 3, when God calls Moses to return to Egypt to liberate the Israelites, Moses says, "Who am I that I should go before Pharaoh in Egypt?" And God doesn't say, "I choose you because you're good looking. I choose you because you're available. I choose you because you grew up there, you know your way around." God says something very, very powerful. God says, "I will be with you." And implicit in that is that redemption, the utopian vision of a people living free in their own land and living in partnership with God, is a reality we need to forge with God as partners, but God will not forge that for us. It is up to us to create that. And I think the scriptures paint a picture of what we ought to be tacking toward, of what we ought to be seeking to build and to achieve with God as our partner, as our teacher, and as our guide.
Very good. John?
I cannot disagree with anything that's been said around the table. I understand that Revelation, in particular, it's not crystal ball gazing. It's not looking into the future in some crystal ball way. Instead, what is going on is the present now. And I think that's a critical word, the present now, in relationship to how God is revealing God's personhood in our life. I want to be able to spend a little bit of time, particularly with regard to Revelations, because there was a very interesting and important article that was written in the in the Andrews University Seminary Study series in 2018, exactly on this subject. And one of the things that came out of that discussion in the Andrews University Seminary Study program is that apocalyptic is not something that is crystal ball gazing. It's not. We today think about apocalyptic literature as something that is foretelling the future in some way. When is the end time going to come? But that certainly is not the thrust and purpose of apocalyptic literature. It's a style. It's a way of dealing with situations that are so difficult that you cannot use imagery from the particular moment, but imagery of future. But it's still always dealing with the present. And I think that this is so clear when we start looking at the apocalyptic literature, both in the Revelation of John, as well as in Isaiah. Isaiah 60, from which you were referring today. So it's really an important contrast. And it really comes down to, how do we understand the Bible? How do we understand what the Scripture is and the purpose of Scripture, and how God is in revelation with us now?
Very good. Dan?
So I think actually one of the gifts of religious tradition, doesn't matter which one it is that it does paint a utopian image. I think, those that fall away from religious teachings say, well, the now is what there is, and that's what there always will be, and there's a cynicism and a skepticism that comes from that. And I think what religious traditions and ideology and Scripture teach us is to imagine a better future, to transcend the present, to imagine a future that could be utopian, that could be dramatically better. There's this paradox between the cyclical nature of time, which all of our faith traditions represent in the agricultural calendar and the holiday calendar. We come back every year to different holidays, different things in a cycle. Every week it's a Sabbath. But yet time is also linear, it's progressive. We're taught that we go from creation to revelation to redemption. And I think that as we move through those cycles without a religious ideology, you just kept caught in the cycle and you never move forward towards a better vision.
John?
That is what is called God's dream. And how we dream of God's revelation to us, and to be able to move us out of that situation. And so I think that fits perfectly within the context of what you were speaking about. It is God's dream of God's revelation, and how we understand it, therefore, to move forward.
Carl? Sorry, Tom.
Go ahead.
I was just going to bring in a little Whiteheadian imagery to get outside the religious tradition even. Alfred North Whitehead was a philosopher who was only maybe tangentially religious, took that notion of the cycles of things and yet the forward movement, and created imagery that literally looked like that. We are in these cycles, but God has input in every instance of every day and of every life, and that input is to keep things moving forward. We don't always move forward. Sometimes we move backward, but the grand scheme of things is an arc that is moving in the right direction toward goodness, not inevitably, but toward goodness. And by faith, we live as if that were true.
Well, Dan, your comment reminded me of Reinhold Niebuhr a little bit. There's an essay that he wrote about the relevance of an impossible ethical ideal, namely agape love, the self-sacrificial love. And says, well, what's the point if you can never embody it? And for him, it serves as both the ground that sustains a being and ethical behavior, but it also is this goal to which it's always if you will, a prophetic judgment of the contemporary time that we have more to do. Right? We've not arrived. And so it's an ongoing effort and motion toward that. And I appreciated that.
There's actually a prayer in the daily liturgy that Jews recite twice a day, 3 times a day, towards the end of what's called the standing prayer, the Amidah, which is called Ritzeh. It says, God, be gracious with us because we kind of know this isn't what you had in mind, right? That we know that there was a vision out there of how we should be worshiping, how we should be living, and we know this ain't it. So we need you to meet us halfway because we're given the best we can, and we need you to continue to guide us and to help us. And this is a prayer that Jews say 3 times a day. There is an understanding that we are not there yet. And at the same time, at the end of every Sabbath, there's a ritual that Jews perform called Havdalah, which separates the holy time of the Sabbath from the regular time of the week. And you invoke in that set of blessings the prophet Elijah, that there should come a time maybe when this won't be, and there will never be an end to that Sabbath time. So there is this sort of, I think, tension between striving for a utopian goal and recognizing the imperfect present in which you live, and then feeling that push to drive yourself a little bit incrementally toward. You know, the interesting thing about the Torah, about the first 5 books, is it ends before they get to the Promised Land. Mm-hmm. And as soon as you're about to set foot in the Promised Land, in Jewish tradition, you rewind and go back to the beginning, because we're not there yet. The Torah is not a book about how you live in the Promised Land. It's a book about how you wander in the wilderness on your way there.
Tom?
Yes, and the Christian understanding adds to that the way has been shown, that we can see in the model, in the example of the man Jesus of Nazareth, this way that we are to move from where life is now to what God intends it to be. And that's by each of us living like this one.
Good.
What I find absolutely fascinating about this conversation is that in Revelation, and to look at the Revelation, it is not revelations, but the Revelation.
The apocalypse.
The apocalypse. And so oftentimes that is, of course, and this is a postscript, really, to John the Apostle. But most likely it was written by a person by the name of John the Elder in Asia Minor. And what is going on here in Asia Minor at this time? At this time, Christians, by the 1st century, at the time that this was actually written, perhaps in 93, Asia Minor had 100,000 Christians living there. It was the major center. Extreme wealth, theaters, temples, libraries, gyms, baths, everything that you could possibly have in ancient Rome and part of the empire was there. Major cities like Tarsus and Antioch. And I think it's when we start looking at this apocalyptic literature, well, what is John responding to here? What is being told in this time of crisis? Yes. But what's being talked about here to these new Christians? 1 century later, there actually is 200,000 Christians living in Asia Minor. So just within 100 years, what had happened? And I think that you have this type of reflection then of the situation on the ground at that time of what that crisis is, that dream.
Very good. Very good. We've been discussing this, and it's really fascinating to me that so many different perspectives on this very, very talked about subject in all of our scriptures. And so many of us also believe that the second coming is literal. And while it's not a crystal ball for us to try to predict exactly what time things are going to happen, it certainly is a promise that will be fulfilled quite literally. We're going to go to a break right now, and we'll come back for some summations in just a moment.
We hope you are enjoying today's program. If you would like to learn more about the American Religious Town Hall, please visit our website at americanreligious.org. That's americanreligious.org. There you can read about the mission and history of the program, learn about the Town Hall estates, and view past programs by clicking the appropriate menu buttons. Each week, Pastor Lutz looks forward to receiving your letters. You may write to him at the address shown on your screen. Send your letters to Pastor Jerry Lutz, American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. That's Pastor Jerry Lutz, American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. Thank you for writing, and thank you for watching. And now, back to you and today's closing statements.
Welcome back. Pastor Lutz does like to receive your communications, both by mail and email, and you saw those addresses there, and I think you'll see them again at the end of the program. We would love to hear what you have to say, and we would love to hear your suggestions for future programs. It's very important to us, and now we have the privilege of, again, our panel is well-versed in these subjects, and we love to hear from them. And we'll begin again with Tom.
Thank you. According to the Gospels, the last thing that Jesus was concerned about was not the end of time, but how we are to live beginning now. We call it the Great Commission. And he gave us that commission to go into all the world and to tell the good news of God's love, to tell people that God is walking with us in every day, and to make disciples. In other words, to teach people to live as He lived, to follow Him. And that is what we are to be concerned about. Beyond that, we can talk, but it doesn't, it should not disrupt our following of that commission.
Carl?
Yeah, the prophecy is about forthtelling the good news of what God has done, what Christ has done for us. And as a kid, I thought what was so cool about the end of the apocalypse, about the end of the book of Revelation, was all these golden streets and this picture, right? It was so idyllic. And I realized later on, someone said, yeah, it's almost like the gold is tar, right? It's so common. What makes gold precious is that it's rare. And I thought, yeah, you're right. And then, of course, it drove me to the point that what's the point is that the Lamb is at the center, right? That God's at the center. It's about a relationship with God that's the critical piece here. It isn't about all the external setup of how the perfect utopia is supposed to be. It's about a relationship with God.
Thank you. Dan?
In our tradition, we're taught that God does not give us a perfect world. God gives us a broken world. And that we are asked to be the ones who assemble those shards of holiness that are all around us and to fashion a world that is in and of itself utopian. It's our responsibility to build that world. And I worry when you read about prophecy as almost an excuse, well, I don't have to do that work because God will do the work for me. And that's not, I think, how the prophets wanted it to be. I think the prophets wanted to paint a picture that says if you live in relationship with God and you adhere to that commandment, be holy, this could be what your world could look like.
John?
I am so grateful to you, Carl, for you said something very important in your final summary, and that is you spoke about the Lamb. And of course, the church understands the Lamb as being Jesus. And one of the things that has not come up in this discussion today is that part of Revelation is certainly dealing with competing lordships. Who was the Lord? In Asia Minor, who was the Lord at that time? And that becomes a major issue that you have here, that how one deals in a situation in which you have a different Lord than God, Jesus. And that picks up a tension that you find in the Gospels, for example. Who is the Lord? And the Lordship. And politically speaking here, and the scripture here is political. They're dealing with political events. Who is going to be the reigner? And the tension in Asia Minor at that time certainly dealt with that subject. And we have to read the text from that perspective.
Thank you, John. We have a lot of interesting perspectives that we've heard here today. I'm fascinated because I come from a tradition that believes in predictive prophecy, and we see predictive prophecy both in what we call the Old Testament, you call the Hebrew Scriptures, and in the New Testament as well. And the interesting note that I've always noticed myself is that no one has ever successfully used predictive prophecy to predict an event correctly. Even in the Hebrew Scriptures, the prophets clearly told them there are going to be this many years and there's going to be this captivity. You're going to be taken, and it still sort of came as a surprise to them. They were still amazed by it. And you'll be 70 years. Then of course Daniel says he will be going back now. But as we see that in working through our scriptures, my tradition teaches, and I believe we can justify from the Bible, and we're really different on this one, and I really appreciate and that we can talk about this. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you very much. The charter of the American Religious Town Hall provides that Roman Catholics, Protestants, Jews, educators, and others may appear on this program and can declare their beliefs without hesitancy. And the rest of the members of the panel will uphold and guarantee that American right to all who will appear, irrespective of race or creed, so that the rest of the world can see that here in America, we believe in civil and religious freedom, not only in theory, but in reality. Now, friends, until next week at the same time and over the very same channel, the American Religious Town Hall meeting stands adjourned. And may the God of all of us bless all of you.